From forgotten scrolls to future hope, this is Messages of Old. You've heard of Genesis, the world's first origin story. But in 1947, a Bedouin shepherd cracked open a jar in this cave and uncovered another Genesis, sleeping for 2,000 years. The Book of Jubilees timestamps creation, flood, and Exodus with stopwatch precision, rewiring everything we thought we knew. Want to see the Bible's secret calendar, Pre-Sinai laws etched in heaven, and the battle of rival clocks that shaped history? Stay tuned, episode starts now. Title card flashes. The Book of Jubilees, a second Genesis. Finding a lost Genesis in a desert cave. The shattering sound. Picture the Judean wilderness in 1947. Limestone cliffs glow pink at dusk, heat still shimmering above thorn bushes. A teenage Bedouin named Muhammad Adib has lost a goat. He scrambles up a dry ravine near Qumran, eyes scanning every crevice. In frustration, he palms a stone and hurls it into a dark cave mouth. Instead of the hollow thud he expects, he hears clay explode. Curious, he squeezes through the gap. Inside he finds tall jars toppled, their once sealed lids broken. No gold glitters. Only rolls of leather wrapped in linen lie on the dusty floor, their edges green with age. He has no idea he is staring at the oldest biblical manuscripts the modern world will ever see. Among fragments of Isaiah, Deuteronomy, and community rules lies a parchment whose column headings do not match any known Hebrew book. Years later, scholars will unfold its sheet and realize they have stumbled upon a text that retells Genesis and the opening of Exodus with almost obsessive precision. The margin bears 3 Hebrew words: Sefer HaYavlim, the Book of Jubilees. From Ethiopian outlier to Jewish original. Before the Qumran discovery, most Western professors knew Jubilees only through an Ethiopic translation cherished by priests in the highlands of Aksum. Because the Ethiopic manuscript tradition is medieval, critics assumed the work itself was late and derivative. Some catalogs filed it under pseudepigrapha, a polite term for ancient fan fiction. The Dead Sea Scroll copy rewrote that judgment overnight. Paleography dated the handwriting to the 2nd century before Christ, placing it within the intellectual ferment that produced the Maccabean revolt. Suddenly, Jubilees became a primary voice in Second-Temple Judaism, a cousin to the more famous Book of Enoch, and a missing link in the family tree of biblical literature. For viewers used to Netflix true crime, reveals the twist is irresistible. A supposedly fringe document turns out to be an insider memo from the very community that shaped parts of the New Testament. Classroom footnote becomes headline. The weight of a word. Why call it Jubilees? In Leviticus, a Jubilee is a super Sabbath year that arrives after 7 cycles of 7 years. Slaves go free, debts evaporate, land reverts to ancestral families. The anonymous author arranges all early biblical events in a lattice of weeks of years. Creation, the flood, Abraham's migration, even Joseph's coffin, all fit into fixed intervals of 49 or multiples thereof. Heaven in this narrative is an accountant's office where angels stamp dates onto cosmic ledgers and nothing slips deadline. Imagine taking the free-flowing artistry of Genesis, then locking every brush stroke to a spreadsheet. That is the Book of Jubilees. Moses and the Cosmic Court Reporter. The prologue stages Moses on Sinai, just days after Israel escapes Egypt. A radiant being identified as the Prince of the Presence approaches and instructs him to copy the entire primeval history from heavenly tablets onto parchment. In Genesis, the reader never learns who kept minutes while God spoke worlds into being. Jubilees answers. Moses the prophet becomes Moses the court stenographer, coached line by an angel who possesses perfect memory. For modern audiences, that detail matters. We trust a story more when we know the source is inside the room, or in this case, above the room. Creation in stopwatch mode. The angel begins with familiar territory, 6 days of forming and the 7th of rest. Yet each day receives subroutines Genesis omits. On day 1, God not only divides light from darkness, but appoints guardian spirits over frost, heat, cloud, and thunder. Day foreplaces the sun, moon, and stars in the sky specifically so humans can track sacred festivals. In other words, physics exists to serve liturgy. By the end of the first human week, Adam names animals. By the close of the second, he and Eve reside in Eden. Only after 7 uninterrupted years of marital bliss, Jubilees gives the exact figure, does the serpent enter stage left. The theological punchline is clear. Sin arrives late, not baked into creation, but invading after a sabbatical honeymoon. Evil is a parasite on order, not its twin. Timestamp faith. When Adam and Eve eat the fruit, Jubilees marks the date. 17th day of the second month. The same date will mark the outbreak of Noah's flood. As if history runs on a moral metronome, the text records the birth of Seth, the murders of the giants, the construction of the ark, all with calendar tags. If you are the kind of viewer who cannot start a jog without hitting record on your smartwatch, you have ancient kin. Jubilees treats time stamps as theology, filling blank spaces. Genesis moves quickly, leaving gaps large enough to drive a documentary truck through. Jubilees patches many of them. It names Noah's wife as Amzara and Cain's wife as Awan. It describes Eden as a walled garden paved with black stones that sparkle like resin. It locates the Tower of Babel in the plains between the Tigris and the Euphrates, rising through 70 circular stories. Each detail begs for visual treatment. Animators sketch black basalt walls. Art directors test resin textures under studio lights. And suddenly the first chapters of the Bible come alive in high definition. The earliest feast day. Genesis tells how Noah disembarks and sacrifices animals. Jubilees zooms in on the 15th day of the third month, the future date of Pentecost, and labels the ceremony an everlasting covenant. Noah sprinkles blood on 12 stones, roasts the flesh, and decrees that his descendants will keep that day forever. For Jubilees, the festivals of Israel predate Israel itself. Sabbath is blessed in Eden, circumcision in Abraham's camp, and dietary law on the ark. Sinai will later formalize what has always been true. The implication is bold. Divine law is not cultural but cosmic, woven into the universe like DNA. Abraham recalibrates the heavens. Fast forward 20 generations. Abraham eyes the night sky from a ridge above Jerusalem, then a Jebusite village. Jubilees says the patriarch calculates the solstices and concludes that a 364-day solar calendar perfectly divides into weeks, preventing feast days from drifting. He predicts that later generations will switch to a lunar calendar of 354 days, leading to festival chaos and divine judgment. The debate sounds quaint until we remember the modern wrangle over daylight saving time, leap seconds, and which country controls Greenwich Mean Time. Calendar fights are never trivial. They define sovereignty. Hagar, Ishmael, and inclusive monotheism. Genesis sketches Hagar's exile, but leaves her later life blank. Jubilees fills the silence. It records Hagar finding an Egyptian wife for Ishmael and describes Ishmael instructing his sons in the law of Abraham. The move lowers ethnic tension by granting covenant practice to branches of the family tree left outside Israel proper. For a diverse American audience, the rewrite signals that monotheism has room for multiple surnames. The cliffhanger in Goshen. Chapter 1 of our series concludes where Genesis itself closes, with Jacob's descendants flourishing in Egypt and Joseph's bones resting in a coffin. The angel narrator tells Moses the story will continue through bondage, plagues, and desert law-giving. All sync to the same Jubilee clock. Then the voice fades. The parchment rustles. We fade to black, but not before posting a question on screen. Text on screen. If time itself can be sacred math, what does that do to your Google Calendar? Credits roll over oud music and desert wind. Viewers are invited to subscribe for Chapter 2, where we follow the Jubilee ledger through Exodus and watch law, ritual, and empire collide. Calendar Wars and Pre-Sinai Commandments. A Tale of Two Clocks. Picture a split screen at the top of the video. On the left, a silver crescent swells and shrinks while a subtitle reads Lunar Month, 29.5 days. On the right, a golden solar dial clicks forward in perfect sets of 7. The narrator explains that ancient Judea was not united by a single calendar. At least 3 systems competed for authority. The temple priesthood favored a lunar-solar blend, many villagers tracked the pure lunar cycle, and the writers of the Book of Jubilees championed a solar year of 364 days. The camera zooms into that right-hand dial, and the rest of the episode unfolds on its steady rhythm. Why 364 beats 354? A year built of 52 exact weeks means every festival returns to the same weekday forever. In the world of Jubilees, Passover is always on a Wednesday. Pentecost is always on a Sunday. That fixed pattern lets priests prepare lambs and grain offerings without searching the night sky for a first sliver of moon. Modern viewers feel the appeal at once. Christmas never slides toward a workday. Thanksgiving never drifts into August. The narrator contrasts the Islamic lunar calendar, where Ramadan travels backward 11 days per civil year, and Jewish civil use of the lunisolar system, where festivals swing within a 30-day window. Stability versus mobility becomes the thematic tug of war, the Sabbath that predates Sinai. Genesis introduces Sabbath on day 7 of creation, but says little about its use before Moses. Jubilees fills the gap. Noah keeps a 7th-day rest, even while waves pound his ark. Abraham refuses to travel on the Sabbath, choosing to camp overnight rather than risk violating cosmic order while hurrying to rescue Lot. Jacob receives his dream of a stairway at Bethel during the Sabbath year inside a Jubilee cycle, as if ultimate visions prefer quiet seasons. By piling examples, the author argues that moral law is part of the operating system of the universe, not a temporary patch applied at Sinai. The episode cuts to a neuroscientist who notes that humans who block out one day of rest each week show measurable gains in emotional regulation. Science, the video hints, may be verifying what Jubilees preached long ago: circumcision as cosmic upgrade. The next segment opens with a parchment illustration of an angel extending a glowing covenant tablet to Abraham. In Genesis, circumcision is introduced in chapter 17. Jubilees rewrites the moment. The tablet already bears the sign of circumcision, a mark worn by heavenly beings themselves. When 8-day surgery enters human practice, it merely aligns newborns with a program that has always existed. The narrator focuses on that 8-day detail. 6 days for work, a 7th for rest, and an 8th for dedication forms a cadence that shows up in medical studies of immune system development in infants. Viewers who have debated infant baptism or childhood rites hear a surprising analog from antiquity: clean, unclean, and the first dietary debate. Genesis permits meat only after the flood. Jubilees rolls dietary categories back to Eden itself. Angels teach Adam which animals are clean. Cain and Abel offer grain and lamb for that reason. When the ark is loaded, Noah receives 7 pairs of each clean species, reinforcing prior knowledge. The video splits again. On one side, a vegan activist praises Edenic plant eating. On the other, a kosher butcher explains that ritual slaughter recognizes sacred boundaries in nature. The narrator refuses to settle the argument. Instead, he poses a question: if dietary codes existed before ethnicity, could food ethics become common ground rather than battle line? The unseen war of angels and tests. Jubilees borrows from the Book of Enoch and expands. The sons of God who married human women produce giants whose violence pushes humanity toward the flood. After the deluge, 90% of their spirits are chained. 10% remain as demons permitted to test, not destroy. Their commander, Mastema, bargains with God for that limited role. The screen shows an infrared night vision experiment where volunteers resist tempting visuals while hooked to brain scanners. A psychologist comments that temptation research today still frames moral struggle as a scripted test with boundaries. The video draws a straight line from Mastema's negotiated limits to lab rules approved by ethics boards. Mapping sacred geography. A parchment map appears. Eden sits east of a broader region, also called Eden. It is bordered by black stones that flare like embers when struck. The land of Cain lies northwest. The city of Ur-Kasdim appears near modern Haran, and the valley of Rephaim south of Jerusalem hosts the battle where Abraham rescues Lot. Each location gains latitude and longitude estimates that viewers can plug into Google Earth. Archaeologist Robert Cargill drops in via green screen to caution that ancient toponyms float, yet he admits the treasure hunt thrill. YouTube comments fill with amateur coordinates before the segment ends. Color bars of history. The screen turns into a horizontal timeline made of colored bricks. Creation to the fall equals 1 Jubilee. Fall to flood equals 12. Flood to the birth of Abraham spans 38. Abraham to the Exodus covers 15. A presenter stacks the bars until the chart reaches Moses, then adds gray placeholders extending to the present. If the pattern kept going, the year 2023 would fall inside the 114th Jubilee. A poll flashes. Which year in your life felt like a Sabbath year for the planet? Answers pile in. 2008 financial crash, 2020 pandemic pause, 2022 Great Resignation, the economics of debt forgiveness. Every 7th year the law commands a land Sabbath. Every 49th cancels debts. Jubilees treats these rules as eternal, rooted in the opening of creation. A graphics package shows what would happen if student loans vanished every half-century. One economist runs the numbers. Lenders would price risk differently, but productivity might surge because young adults could start families earlier. An environmental scientist adds that allowing soil to rest 1 year in 7 would sequester additional carbon and restore insect populations. A licensed therapist closes the segment, noting that weekly and yearly rhythms prevent burnout. Sabbath is not a luxury, she says. It is preventive medicine for society. Battle for the bookshelf. The final major section turns to the Second Temple era. Qumran community rule scrolls quote Jubilees more often than the Psalms. Pharisees ignore it, likely because a solar calendar would dismantle their moon-based festival system. Early Christian writers read Jubilees. Church Father Epiphanius accuses certain sects of treating it as scripture. By the 5th century Latin and Greek bishops drop it from approved lists, calling it too Jewish. Meanwhile, Ethiopian Christianity canonizes it, transmitting the only complete manuscript into modern times. The narrator slows down. The story shows that canons are not carved in granite. Political centers decide which texts survive in pew Bibles. Cliffhanger toward the modern world. Footage shifts to industrial farms stripped of topsoil, city streets blurring with commuter traffic, office workers scrolling screens at midnight. The voiceover asks, what happens when a civilization ignores Sabbath math? Does soil exhaustion mirror soul exhaustion? Viewers see burnout statistics rising along with greenhouse gas curves. The narrator teases Chapter 3, promising to test the Jubilee ethic against 21st century economics and climate policy, and to ask whether a planet on the edge can survive without a global year of release. The music fades on a minor chord that holds just long enough to make clicking subscribe feel like a moral duty, resetting debts and healing the planet. Present-day entry point. A camera drone glides over lower Manhattan at dawn. Ticker boards outside the stock exchange glow neon green and red numbers that never sleep. Cut to a slow pan across soybean fields in western Kansas, where soil has cracked into a giant jigsaw puzzle under record heat. Fade again to a therapist's waiting room in Chicago. Half a dozen professionals scroll their phones in silence, dark circles under weary eyes. The narrator speaks in a calm Midwestern accent. 3,000 years ago, a Hebrew scroll proposed a radical pattern. Every 7th day people rest. Every seventh year, land rests. Every Jubilee cycle, 49 years, slaves walk free and debts are erased. The Book of Jubilees calls that rhythm the law of heaven. What if a forgotten calendar still holds the antidote for personal burnout, economic anxiety, and planetary stress? Debt before delight. Inside a minimalist studio, two economists face a transparent board. One writes compound interest equations with fluorescent marker. Numbers multiply across the glass. Student loans at 5% climb from $20,000 to nearly $40,000 within a single Jubilee span. Overlay graphics compare that curve to sharecropper debts recorded on clay tablets from the Persian period. Both lines rise in the same steep silhouette. A humanitarian advocate joins the frame and holds up a facsimile of Jubilees chapter 30. The text commands that families who lost property must return home at the Jubilee. Land is not a commodity for permanent sale. It is a trust for each clan. The host turns to camera. Imagine if Main Street real estate automatically returned to the grandchildren of original owners every half-century. Would property speculation change? Would neighborhoods stabilize? We asked 4 economists across the political spectrum to run the scenario. Quick sound bites follow. A libertarian worries about capital flight. A progressive applauds the built-in wealth redistribution. A behavioral scholar notes that housing bubbles form when people forget cycles and assume linear growth. Land needs Sabbath too. The scene shifts to rolling prairie under gray winter sky. A regenerative farmer named Maria stands next to rows of rye cover crop peeking through snow. She digs into the earth with a gloved hand and lifts a handful of black loam alive with earthworms. Maria explains that her yield rose 18% after she adopted a 1-year in 7 fallow pattern. Each resting acre receives compost tea and pollinator strips. Bees hum around frozen sunflower stalks even in December sunlight. An agronomist in a Kansas State lab presents side-by-side slides of rested soil versus continuously tilled soil. Rested soil holds twice as much carbon and 5 times the microbial diversity. Satellite imagery overlays show Great Plains counties, where topsoil loss parallels counties with highest farm debt. The narrator speaks again. Jubilees links soil security with financial security. When land rests, both ground and families recover together. Prison abolition echoes. A montage of razor wire and cell blocks cuts in. The United States leads the world in incarceration per capita. Jubilee states plainly that no covenant member may hold another in permanent bondage. At year 7, servants walk free. At the Jubilee, they return to family property with livestock and produce, so they start anew. Enter Darius, a man released from an Illinois prison after 15 years. He reads a passage from Jubilees predicting judgment on captors who refuse release. His voice shakes, yet remains steady. Beside him, a graph rises that tracks inmate numbers and consumer debt on parallel axes, 2 curves that climb together like arms of a tuning fork. A criminal justice scholar argues that addiction, poverty, and unpaid fines feed the prison loop much as crop failure fed ancient debt slavery. The video avoids slogans. Instead, it lets the parallel data speak. Climate Sabbath and carbon math. Next comes a quick cut to a global climate model. Bright ribbons of carbon output racing across a 3D globe. A climatologist named Dr. Lee pauses the simulation every 7 virtual years, freezing smokestack icons for 12 digital months. The model shows carbon levels dropping back to 1998 benchmarks if heavy industry shut down once each decade. Skeptics appear on a split screen. A shipping executive claims that a scheduled stop year would wreck supply chains. A wind energy CEO counters that advance notice allows maintenance and upgrades with no economic collapse. The narrator reminds viewers how pandemic lockdowns accidentally proved that air quality can rebound within weeks when fossil fuel engines pause. Data from Los Angeles, Delhi, and Milan scroll up the side of the screen. Economic models of release. Inside a Boston think tank's supercomputer racks blink green. A data scientist walks the audience through a scenario where mortgage principal automatically drops 7% every sabbatical year. Gross domestic product dips 3% during the reset and rebounds within 2 years. Charts show household discretionary spending flattening instead of spiking and crashing. Interview clips alternate between a Wall Street strategist and a community banker from Iowa. The strategist fears moral hazard. The banker laughs and says moral hazard already exists because the top 1% receive bailouts, while farms close every drought year. The tension remains unresolved, mirroring the open ending of the biblical text. Digital burnout and weekly rest. Back to the present-day city. Phone screens light faces in a subway car at midnight. Notifications pop like popcorn. The angel in Jubilees warned that those who skipped Sabbath would die by their own evil desire. A neurologist illustrates dopamine curves that flatten with continuous scrolling. Influencer Maya Johnson appears. 10 million subscribers watch her fashion and mental health content. She announces a weekly 24-hour phone blackout. Analytics later show her average views rise 8% after each absence. Clips of followers echo her practice and report similar boosts. The narrator smiles. Turns out the algorithm loves a rested brain. Canon debates and authority today. The film cuts to a round reading room in Oxford. Sociologist Dr. Patel traces the canon journey of Jubilees, from Essene scripture to medieval obscurity to Dead Sea Scroll headline. Dr. Patel argues that cultures often sideline texts that threaten commercial or religious convenience. When crises surface, those same texts return like buried seeds waiting for rain. The host links that idea to the modern rediscovery of Stoic philosophy in therapy apps, or indigenous fire management resurrected after mega wildfires. Forgotten wisdom, the video says, frequently hides the map to tomorrow. Objections on practicality. A round table of 6 business leaders occupies the next segment. Each has a visible name tag and industry title. One fears hyperinflation if debts reset. Another counters with evidence that inflation already spirals without relief. A historian cites ancient inscriptions showing bumper crops during sabbatical cycles in Judea, suggesting divine or ecological compensation. The camera does not pick a winner. Instead, it zooms out slowly while voices overlap. The unresolved chord invites reflection rather than instant agreement. Spiritual resonance. Night falls in Addis Ababa. An Ethiopian Orthodox church glows with candles. Congregants chant the creation hymn in Ge'ez on Saturday night before Easter dawn. The priest explains that Jubilees guides the vigil because its solar calendar keeps Easter in cosmic symmetry. Cut to Jerusalem, where a conservative Jewish scholar stands before the Western Wall. He respects Jubilees, yet asserts that holiness resides in lived obedience more than in perfect date math. The dialogue models disagreement without hostility. A final exchange shows both men smiling as they trade gifts of local bread. Call for micro-jubilees. Back in the studio, the host turns directly to viewers. A global jubilee feels impossible. What about a micro-jubilee? Tear up one small debt. Let one corner of your yard grow wild. Power down all screens from sunset Friday to sunset Saturday. Short clips roll. A single mother in Ohio rips an IOU her friend signed 3 years earlier. A college sophomore declines Black Friday shopping and donates the saved cash to a food bank. A construction foreman leaves a 1/4 acre of company land for pollinator flowers. The foreman laughs that bees work overtime so he can rest. Narrative close. Second Genesis for a frayed world. The camera returns to Qumran Cave 4. Dust floats in spear-thin light from a cracked ceiling. Fragments of Jubilees lie inside climate-controlled cases. The lens zooms to a phrase in fading ink. Just as the heavens and the earth were finished, so shall they be renewed. The narrator speaks softly. Genesis is not simply about a beginning. Jubilees hints at a rhythm of perpetual beginnings. Release. rest, renewal. Time is a spiral, not a fuse. If humanity learns to step off the treadmill and onto the Sabbath path, the second Genesis can arrive on schedule. Final invitation. Black screen. White text fades in. What would a Jubilee look like on your block? A QR code appears linking to a playlist on ethical finance, permaculture, and faith-based rest practices. The Stone Mountain finale theme from Chapter 1 returns. A cello rises into a full choir that holds a bright major chord, then diminishes into soft wind noise. End credits roll as seed paper confetti drifts across the screen, waiting to take root wherever it lands.